Okay, so now I want to talk about, okay, if the Iranians are going to use asymmetrical warfare, what would it look like? And the answer is this. When the Americans invade, okay, the war started. Before the invasion, the Iranians must do four things if it is to prevail in the war, okay? And this is what we call the Iran strategy matrix. Okay? The Iran strategy matrix means that from now on, everything they do must fit into the strategy matrix. Okay? It must accomplish the objectives of the strategy matrix. So the first thing it must do is unite the population. Okay? Second thing it must do is build alliances. And the third thing is win global opinion. And the fourth is weaken the enemy. Okay? So, in other words, everything that Iran is going to do from now until the actual invasion will be to accomplish all four goals at once. And it must, if it is to survive a full-scale American invasion. Okay? Does it make sense? All right. So, unite the population. What does this mean? Okay? It means that you win the war depending on how much your population is willing to resist the invasion. And it turns out that even though the Iranians right now are divided, okay, there's a lot of opposition towards the current government in Iran. As some of you know, there have been some protests over the past few years, women protesting for more rights in Iran, okay? So there's a lot of division in that country. But I think that most Iranians would resist an invasion. And the reason why is that the Iranians have a very bad history with Westerners, okay? So the example is the 1953 coup d'etat, okay? So what happened is that in 1909, the British discovered oil in Iran. It was called Persia back then. And so they created a company called the Anglo-Iranian Petroleum Company, which we now know as British Petroleum, okay, BP. And the idea is that this company would be responsible for extracting and selling all the oil. But unfortunately, the deal was that Iran, Persia, would only get 16% of profits. Okay? They only got 16% of profits. So the Iranians are very upset about this. It's their oil, it's their resource, but they're not getting that much money out of it, okay? It's basically stealing. So for decades, the Iranians have been trying to renegotiate the deal. In 1953, the democratically elected government of Iran said to the British, listen, let's do 50-50. Okay, that's fair, 50-50. 50% for us, 50% for you, right? That's a fair deal. And the British, instead of saying yes, went to the Americans, and the British and the Americans together launched a coup d'etat against the democratically elected government of Iran and installed a police state called the Shah. Okay, the Shah, which is like the monarchy, okay? And the Shah, the king of Iran, was so brutal that he created a police state. In 1979, the Iranian people overthrew the Shah, okay? And so the Iranian people do not like the idea of foreign invaders coming in and controlling the resource, okay? Does that make sense? So over time, as Israel and as America continues to be aggressive towards Iran, the population will start to coalesce and fight against the Americans, okay? So that's unite the population. Second is build alliances. Now, Iran has two layers of alliance. The first layer is called the axis of resistance, right? Which I asked you to research. And the axis of resistance includes the Shia militias in Iraq, Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen. Okay? Now, what's important to understand is that this is not an alliance. What's important to understand is that this is an alliance. Okay? They agree to fight together because they have common interests, which is to remain independent of American influence. Okay? But that does not mean that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis take orders from Iran. Okay? They're not controlled by Iran. Iran supports them militarily and financially, but Iran cannot completely control their behavior. Okay? So the example is on October 7th, Hamas launched an attack against Israel, right? Which resulted in this war. And Iran says, we were not involved. And Israel says that can't be true because you control Hamas, right? So that's the first layer of alliance. But what Iran needs to do if it is to win the war is also bring in Russia and China. Okay? Russia wants the United States to fight Iran. Why? Yeah, but true, to distract and weaken the United States, and also to move the attention away from Ukraine, right? Does that make sense? Because Russia is about to win the war in Ukraine, and if there's a war in Iran, then the United States will be forced to divert resources away from Ukraine into Iran, okay? What would Russia bring to the table? Russia would probably not deploy soldiers, okay? But what Russia would do is say to the United States, when you invade Iran, you are not allowed to use tactical nuclear weapons, okay? You understand? Russia would say that, hey, United States, if you use weapons, nuclear weapons against Iran, we will use nuclear weapons against you, okay? So basically, Russia would limit the military options of America in a war, which would be of tremendous benefit and advantage to Iran. Okay, does that make sense? China needs to help Iran. Why? What does Iran have that China really needs? What does Iran have that China really, really needs? It really needs this. The Chinese economy needs what? Oil, right? So basically, China can afford for the United States to take over both Iraq and Iran because then it can control the energy supply to China. Okay, does that make sense? So China would involve itself over time in order to make sure that it's able to obtain oil from the Middle East. China right now is getting most of its oil from the Middle East. Okay? But it will take time for Russia and China to get themselves involved. For Russia and China to get themselves involved in this conflict, Iran must prove two things. What are these two things? What must Iran show to China and Russia in order to get China and Russia involved in this conflict? If you're China and Russia, you're an investor, right? Why will I invest in you, Iran? Why? Exactly, okay? So the first thing is we will fight. Second thing is we will win, okay? So this will take time for Iran to prove this to Russia and China. And the more that Iran can show it can win, the more that China and Russia will invest in Iran, both financially and militarily and politically. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so this will take time. And the third thing is win global opinion. So how will Iran win global opinion? What's happening right now that's helping Iran win global opinion, basically? What's happening in the world right now that is helping Iran win global opinion? Or why is the world becoming more supportive of Iran? what thing is happening right now that is outraging or angering the world? What's happening right now? What's Israel doing right now that is outraging the world? Yeah, Gaza, okay? So this is really important for Iran. It must maintain the world spotlight on Gaza, okay? Because what's happening in Gaza, it's basically genocide, right? Where the Israelis are committed to solving the Palestinian problem once and for all. And that basically means removing the Palestinians from Gaza. They can go to Egypt, they can go to Jordan, it doesn't matter, okay? But the Israelis want them out of Gaza, okay? And so this will go on for many, many years. And as long as the attention is on Gaza, then people will become much more sympathetic towards Iran over time. Okay? If you've been following the news about America, there have been major protests at Yale and at Columbia and other universities about what's happening in Gaza, okay? All right. And the last is weaken the enemy. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that when the United States invades Iran 2 years from now, 6 years from now, who knows? But when it does so, it wants to build a large coalition of forces, okay? Because then it gives itself legitimacy, right? So this coalition will consist of NATO, Middle East countries, right? And Israel, Saudi Arabia, many, many countries. And what Iran needs to do is create conflict and dissent in this coalition. Okay? And the way it does that is by building up internal dissent. Okay? Does that make sense? There are many people, most people in America do not support a war against Iran. And so Iran needs to encourage this internal dissent. Okay? It can also create conflict between NATO and the United States, okay? Because obviously America will want NATO involved in its invasion of Iran, but why would France and Germany want to involve itself, right? Okay, does that make sense? So these are the 4 major goals of Iran, and it must accomplish all 4 goals if it is to survive an invasion, okay? So from now on, everything that Iran does will be to accomplish all 4 goals, okay? And this is part of asymmetrical warfare. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's look at a concrete example. And the concrete example is Operation True Promise. Why did Iran design Operation True Promise the way it did? And the answer is to accomplish all 4 goals, right? The first is unite the population. And the idea here is Iran needed to show its population that Iran can strike back against Israel, okay? So that's the first thing. Build alliances. Striking Israel is showing its allies and to China and Russia that Iran is willing to fight, okay? Win global opinion. Now, what Iran said is, we designed the strike to not cause damage in Israel. And the reason why is it wants to win global opinion, right? If it throws all these missiles and rockets at Israel and it kills a lot of people, then there'll be a lot of people sympathetic towards Israel. So the attack was designed not to cause any casualties. Okay, does that make sense? All right? And if you are an observer, you think that what Iran did was right because it's a sense of fairness and justice, right? What Israel did was wrong. It attacked an embassy of Iran in Damascus. That's against international law. And Iran, to save face, to pursue justice, threw some rockets at Israel. Okay? So most people think that Iran's response showed restraint, and it was a measured response. Okay, does that make sense?